You're standing in the most dangerous room in England and you've just felt something rumble. It's 1547 and you're in the presence chamber of Henry VIII's court at Whitehall Palace. The air is thick with the scent of rosewater and barely concealed terror. Around you, courtiers in their finest silks and velvets move like elegant chess pieces, each step calculated, each breath measured. You're wearing your finest gown, the one with the corset that cost more than a farmer's yearly wages. And you're trying very, very hard not to move. Because movement, you see, can lead to complications. Before we begin, take a soft breath. And if bedtime tales about history's awkward side help you unwind, feel free to like and subscribe. It helps this little channel keep growing. And let me know in the comments where in the world you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Somehow, it makes this feel more like a quiet gathering than just a video. Now dim the lights, fluff your pillow, and settle in as we tiptoe into a Tudor courtroom, where elegance met embarrassment, and one noble lady learned the hard way that even silence can be deadly. You're new to court life, perhaps. Maybe you've recently inherited a title, or your family has finally scraped together enough money to buy you a position as a gentleman usher or a lady in waiting. Either way, you've spent weeks preparing for this moment. You've practiced your bows and curtsies until your back aches. You've memorized the proper forms of address for everyone from the Lord Chamberlain to the Royal Fool. You've learned to walk with books balanced on your head, to speak only when spoken to, and to never, ever turn your back on royalty. But nobody, absolutely nobody, prepared you for what to do if your digestive system decides to make its presence known. The Tudor court was a place of suffocating ritual and breathtaking beauty. Tapestries worth small fortunes hung from the walls, depicting scenes of classical mythology and royal triumph. The floors were covered in rushes mixed with herbs, lavender perhaps, or sweet woodruff, designed to mask the less pleasant odors of daily life. Courtiers glided through these spaces like swans on a lake, all grace and elegance on the surface, paddling frantically underneath. You're trying to blend in, to become part of this elaborate human theatre, but your stomach has other plans. It starts small, just a tiny gurgle, barely audible above the soft murmur of conversation and the rustle of expensive fabric. You freeze. Was that noticeable? You glance around carefully, trying not to move your head too obviously. The lady to your left is discussing the weather with the intensity of a military strategist. The gentleman to your right is staring fixedly at a portrait of the king, his face a mask of devoted concentration. Good. Nobody noticed. You're safe. For now. But here's the thing about Tudor court life. It was designed to be uncomfortable. The elaborate clothing, the rigid posture requirements, the endless standing and waiting, it was all part of the performance. Courtiers were expected to suffer gracefully for the privilege of being in the royal presence. Fainting from tight corsets was commonplace. Feet went numb from standing for hours. Backs ached from maintaining perfect posture. And through it all, you had to look like you were enjoying every minute of it. The court operated on a complex system of invisible rules and unspoken expectations. Where you stood indicated your status. How you dressed communicated your wealth and allegiances. When you spoke, if you spoke, revealed your education and breeding. Every gesture was loaded with meaning, every silence pregnant with implication. And then there were the sounds your body might make without your permission. You shift slightly, trying to relieve the pressure building in your midsection. The floor creaks beneath your feet, those beautiful wooden floors that Henry VIII loved so much, polished to a mirror shine and utterly unforgiving of any unexpected noise. Around you, conversations continue in hushed tones. Someone mentions the latest dispatch from the continent. Another courtier whispers about a new appointment to the Privy Council. You try to focus on these conversations, to lose yourself in court gossip and political intrigue, but your digestive system has apparently decided that this, right here, right now, in front of the most powerful people in the kingdom, is the perfect time to assert itself. The pressure builds, you clench, You breathe carefully through your nose, maintaining that serene court expression that you've been practicing in your chamber mirror. Your face remains pleasantly neutral, but inside, you're conducting a desperate internal negotiation with your own body. Not now, you plead silently. Literally any other time, but now. But bodies, as any courtier could tell you, have their own agenda. In the Tudor world, the human form was both revered and reviled, celebrated and constrained. Medical knowledge of the time suggested that bodily functions were natural and necessary. Physicians recommended regular purging, bloodletting, and yes, the release of trapped gases for optimal health. But this medical reality existed in direct conflict with the social requirements of court life, where the slightest deviation from perfect composure could be interpreted as a sign of moral weakness or poor breeding. You're caught between biology and etiquette, between the needs of your body and the demands of your social position. It's a uniquely human predicament, really, the gap between who we are privately and who we must be publicly. The conversation around you has shifted to safer topics now. Someone is discussing the latest mask, praising the ingenuity of the costumes and the beauty of the dancing. Another voice chimes in about the quality of the music, the skill of the court musicians. You nod politely when expected, smile when appropriate, and try to look like someone who definitely does not have any pressing internal concerns. But you're fighting a losing battle, and you know it. Here's what most people don't realize about Tudor court life. It was incredibly, almost impossibly, intimate. These weren't large public spaces where you could disappear into a crowd. The presence chamber, where you're currently standing, might hold 50 people at most, all of them acutely aware of everyone else's behavior. Privacy was a luxury that simply didn't exist. Even the king's most private moments were attended by gentlemen of the bedchamber, whose job it was to witness and assist with every aspect of royal life. Which means that if something goes wrong, if your body betrays you in this moment, everyone will know. You're starting to sweat now, despite the cool air. The elaborate court dress that seemed so magnificent when you put it on this morning now feels like a trap. The fabric doesn't breathe. The stays don't give. The layers upon layers of clothing that signal your status also make it impossible to move quickly or escape gracefully. You're committed now. Whatever happens, you'll have to see it through with as much dignity as you can muster. And that's when you remember the stories, the whispered tales that circulate through the servants' quarters and the junior courtiers' chambers. Stories about what happens when someone commits an unforgivable breach of court etiquette. Stories about courtiers who stumbled, who spoke out of turn, who failed to maintain the perfect facade required of their position. Stories about people who let slip something they shouldn't have. The pressure is becoming unbearable now. Your carefully maintained expression is starting to crack. Sweat beads on your forehead, despite the cool October air drifting through the palace windows. You can feel your resolve weakening, your control slipping away bit by bit. And then, just as you think you might lose this battle entirely, you catch sight of something that makes your blood run cold. A figure moving through the crowd with purposeful grace. Someone whose very presence changes the atmosphere of the room. But that's a story for our next gentle exploration together. For now, rest easy, knowing that even in the most formal, most terrifying social situations, we're all just humans trying our best to navigate the impossible gap between expectation and reality. You're doing beautifully. Even when everything feels like it's about to fall apart, you're still here, still trying, still holding on, and sometimes that's more than enough. The figure moving through the crowd is Lady Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, and she's heading directly toward you. This is either very good news or absolutely catastrophic news, and given the current state of your digestive situation, you're leaning heavily toward catastrophe. Lady Margaret has a reputation for noticing things, tiny details that other courtiers miss, subtle breaches of protocol that lesser nobles might overlook. She's the sort of person who can tell from across a room if someone's using the wrong fork or addressing a duke with insufficient deference. She's also, unfortunately, Henry VIII's former governess, which means she has the king's ear and an intimate knowledge of every embarrassing thing that has ever happened to anyone in royal circles. You watch her approach with the same mixture of fascination and terror that you might observe an approaching storm. She moves through the crowd like a ship through calm waters, her dark velvet gown rustling softly against the rush-strewn floor. Other courtiers step aside automatically, bowing their heads in respectful acknowledgement. She acknowledges each gesture with the barest nod, her attention focused entirely on you. This cannot be good, but here's what you're realizing as she draws closer. Sometimes the best defense against social catastrophe is to lean into it with such complete commitment that it becomes a different kind of performance entirely. You straighten your shoulders, lift your chin slightly, and prepare to meet whatever judgment she's bringing with as much dignity as you can muster. The pressure in your midsection hasn't gone anywhere, of course. If anything, the stress of Lady Margaret's approach has made everything worse. Your corset feels tighter than ever, your breathing more shallow, your internal negotiations with your own body increasingly desperate. But you've discovered something interesting about extreme social anxiety. It can actually provide its own form of focus. When the stakes are high enough, when the potential for embarrassment reaches truly epic proportions, your mind achieves a strange kind of clarity. The background chatter of the court fades away. The elaborate tapestries and gleaming surfaces become backdrop rather than distraction. Everything narrows down to this single moment, this approaching conversation, this test of your ability to maintain composure under the most ridiculous circumstances imaginable. Lady Margaret stops precisely 3 feet away from you, close enough to speak quietly, far enough to maintain proper social distance. This is court choreography at its finest, a dance of proximity and respect that everyone learns but no one ever explicitly teaches. "My dear," she says, and her voice is surprisingly warm, "you look rather pale. Are you feeling quite well? This is your moment. This is where you prove that you belong in this rarefied world of silk and ceremony, where you demonstrate that you can handle whatever challenges court life throws at you, even challenges of the most personal and mortifying variety." "I am perfectly well, my lady," you reply, and your voice comes out steady and clear, perhaps a touch overwhelmed by the beauty of the court, but well. It's not entirely a lie. You are overwhelmed, just not in the way she might assume. Lady Margaret studies your face with the sort of attention a physician might give to a particularly interesting symptom. She says, and the sound contains volumes of unspoken observation. The court can indeed be overwhelming for those unaccustomed to its rhythms. She pauses, and you realize she's giving you an opening, a chance to excuse yourself gracefully, to retreat to somewhere more private where you can address your current predicament without further social complications. It's an act of kindness disguised as casual conversation, the sort of subtle rescue that experienced courtiers extend to newcomers who find themselves in over their heads. But accepting her offer would mean admitting weakness, acknowledging that you're not quite ready for the demands of court life. And while your body is currently staging a rebellion against your social ambitions, your pride is still firmly in command of the situation. "I find the rhythms quite invigorating, actually," you say, which is possibly the most ridiculous lie you've ever told in your life. Lady Margaret's eyebrows rise almost imperceptibly. "Indeed." The conversation has attracted the attention of nearby courtiers, as conversations with Lady Margaret always do. You can feel their eyes on you, assessing, judging, waiting to see how this exchange will unfold. Court life is essentially a spectator sport disguised as daily routine, and everyone's always eager for entertainment, which means that whatever happens next will be witnessed, remembered, and quite possibly gossiped about for weeks to come. The pressure in your stomach chooses this moment to intensify, as if your digestive system has been listening to the conversation and decided to contribute its own commentary. You feel a small but unmistakable shift in your internal landscape, a settling that suggests the situation is about to become much more urgent. Your face remains pleasantly neutral. Years of training in ladylike behavior have prepared you for this. The ability to maintain perfect composure, even while your body stages its own private revolution. But inside, You're conducting increasingly frantic calculations about exit strategies and damage control. Perhaps, Lady Margaret continues, her voice carrying just the slightest note of amusement, you might enjoy a tour of the palace gardens. The fresh air can be quite restorative after the closeness of the presence chamber. She's offering you another escape route, more generous than the first. The gardens are far from the court, private enough for whatever personal business you might need to conduct, and face-saving enough that your departure won't be interpreted as retreat. But the growing audience of courtiers is making acceptance increasingly difficult. To leave now would be to admit that you need restoration, that the court's closeness affects you in ways that more seasoned nobles can handle with ease. It would mark you as someone who requires special consideration, someone not quite ready for the demands of royal service. Your stomach gurgles softly, a sound so quiet that only you can hear it. But it's a warning, a gentle reminder that biology doesn't care about social hierarchies or personal pride. Your body has its own timeline, its own priorities, and it's becoming increasingly clear that these priorities don't align with your ambitions for court success. The gardens are lovely, I'm sure, you reply carefully, but I'm quite content here in the heart of the court. Lady Margaret nods slowly, and there's something in her expression that suggests she recognizes the particular brand of stubbornness she's dealing with. She's probably seen it before. Newcomers so determined to prove themselves that they'll endure almost anything rather than admit they might need help. Contentment, she observes, is indeed a virtue, though wisdom lies in knowing when contentment should yield to practical considerations. The gathered courtiers are hanging on every word now. This has become theatre, a performance of social navigation that they'll dissect and analyse later in private chambers and servants' corridors. Every gesture, every pause, every carefully chosen word is being filed away for future reference. And you're standing at the centre of it all, fighting a battle on multiple fronts, against your own body, against social expectations, and against the growing realisation that sometimes the most dignified choice is the one that feels most like surrender. The moment stretches out like honey from a spoon, sweet and golden and impossibly slow. Around you the court continues its elaborate dance of power and protocol. Courtiers murmur about politics and poetry. Servants glide through the crowd with trays of delicate refreshments. The autumn sunlight streams through tall windows, illuminating dust motes that drift like tiny dancers through the perfumed air. And you stand perfectly still, perfectly composed, locked in a contest of wills with your own digestive system, while one of the most powerful women in England waits patiently for your response. At least you think to yourself with a kind of desperate optimism, no one has died yet. That has to count for something. Lady Margaret's words hang in the perfumed air like incense, heavy with unspoken understanding. You realise she's given you every possible graceful exit, and your continued refusal to take them is beginning to shift from admirable determination into something that might charitably be called obstinate foolishness. Your internal situation has progressed from uncomfortable to urgent, to what can only be described as diplomatically catastrophic. The pressure in your lower abdomen has developed its own weather system, complete with warning rumbles and the occasional seismic shift that makes you grateful for the architectural support of your corset. Perhaps, you say carefully, each word measured like precious spices, a brief walk might indeed be beneficial. Lady Margaret's smile is so subtle it might be mistaken for a trick of candlelight, but there's genuine relief in her eyes. She's been watching you wage this particular battle for several minutes now, and she recognizes the strategic wisdom of a well-timed retreat. An excellent notion, she murmurs, and with the sort of courtly grace that makes complex social maneuvers look effortless, she turns to address the gathered spectators. The afternoon light in the rose garden is particularly lovely this time of year. It's a masterful deflection. The courtiers, suddenly reminded that they've been openly eavesdropping on what was meant to be a private conversation, begin to disperse with the embarrassed efficiency of cats caught stalking songbirds. Within moments, the immediate vicinity has cleared enough for you to begin your strategic withdrawal without looking like you're fleeing in panic. You incline your head toward Lady Margaret, with what you hope passes for dignified gratitude. "My lady, my dear." Her voice carries the warmth of someone who has watched countless young courtiers navigate their first catastrophic social situations and lived to tell the tale. You turn toward the great doors of the presence chamber, moving with the sort of measured pace that suggests casual departure rather than desperate escape. Each step is a negotiation between dignity and urgency, between the demands of court protocol and the increasingly rebellious demands of your own body. The presence chamber, which seemed intimate when you were locked in conversation with Lady Margaret, now reveals itself to be approximately the size of a cathedral. The distance between your current position and the doors stretches ahead, like a particularly challenging pilgrimage route. Your eyes fix on those doors with the intensity of a sailor spotting land after months at sea. Halfway across this vast expanse of polished floor and scattered courtiers, your progress is intercepted by a figure emerging from behind one of the massive stone pillars that support the chamber's vaulted ceiling. "My lady!" How fortuitous. The voice belongs to Master Geoffrey Whitmore, a court musician whose talent with the lute is only matched by his talent for appearing at precisely the moments when you least want to engage in pleasant conversation. He's a man of middle years with the sort of earnest, eager expression that suggests he genuinely believes everyone is delighted to see him at all times. Your stomach chooses this moment to produce a sound that, while mercifully quiet, feels like the digestive equivalent of a trumpet fanfare, announcing the arrival of very unwelcome news. "Master Geoffrey," you manage, your voice maintaining its pleasant court cadence despite the fact that your internal organs appear to be conducting their own experimental music composition. "I was just discussing with Lord Pemberton the most fascinating musical theory regarding the mathematical relationships between harmonic intervals," he begins, launching into what promises to be a detailed exposition on a subject that, under normal circumstances, you might find genuinely interesting. These are not normal circumstances. Your body has progressed beyond subtle warnings into what can only be described as active insurrection. The pressure in your midsection has developed a pulse of its own, synchronized with your heartbeat in a way that creates a most unsettling internal rhythm. You find yourself wondering if this is how generals feel when they realize their carefully planned campaigns are about to collapse into complete chaos. "How fascinating," you reply, because court training has prepared you to produce appropriate responses even when your conscious mind is entirely occupied with crisis management. Master Geoffrey beams at what he interprets as genuine interest. "Indeed, you see, if we consider the relationship between the fourth and the fifth intervals..." He gestures expansively, clearly settling in for what he anticipates will be a lengthy and mutually enjoyable scholarly discussion. Behind him you can see the great doors of the presence chamber, tantalizingly close, yet still impossibly far away. They might as well be on the other side of the English Channel for all the good they're doing you at the moment. Your breathing has become carefully controlled, each inhale and exhale measured to avoid any unnecessary pressure on your rebellious midsection. You've discovered that if you stand very still and focus on maintaining perfect posture, you can achieve a sort of precarious equilibrium, like balancing on the edge of a cliff while wearing court shoes. The mathematical precision is truly remarkable, you offer, because Master Geoffrey has paused and is clearly expecting some form of response. "Precisely." He's delighted by your apparent appreciation for his intellectual pursuits. Music, you see, is simply mathematics made audible. The same divine proportions that govern the movement of celestial bodies also determine which combinations of notes create harmony versus discord. The irony is not lost on you that he's discussing harmony while your own internal composition appears to be trending decidedly toward discord. A new sensation makes itself known, a subtle but unmistakable shifting in your lower abdomen that suggests your body's timeline for resolving this situation is considerably shorter than Master Geoffrey's timeline for concluding his musical dissertation. Your face maintains its expression of polite interest while your mind calculates distances, escape routes, and the social ramifications of various potential exit strategies. "The ancient Greeks understood this connection," he continues, warming to his subject. Pythagoras himself wrote extensively about the music of the spheres. You nod at appropriate intervals, making small sounds of agreement while your internal crisis management team works overtime. The afternoon light streaming through the tall windows has shifted, creating new patterns of illumination across the chamber's floor. Dust motes dance in the golden beams like tiny courtiers performing their own elaborate choreography. Which brings us to the question of temperament in keyboard instruments, Master Geoffrey is saying, apparently having covered several centuries of musical theory while you were focused on not disgracing yourself in front of half the English court. Your smile feels increasingly fragile, like expensive porcelain subjected to more stress than it was designed to handle. Master Geoffrey, you interrupt gently, I find myself in need of... That is, I should very much like to. He waits expectantly, his earnest face turned toward you with the patient attention of someone accustomed to being the smartest person in most conversations. To visit the chapel, you finish, settling on the one destination that even the most socially aggressive courtier won't attempt to accompany you to. For private devotions. Ah, his expression shifts to one of respectful understanding. Of course, my lady. Faith must always take precedence over scholarship, however fascinating. He steps aside with a flourish that somehow manages to be both gracious and dramatic. Perhaps we might continue our discussion at another time. I should be delighted you lie with the smooth expertise that months of court life have taught you. Master Geoffrey bows with the sort of elaborate courtesy that court musicians perfect through years of trying to remain memorable to nobles who control their continued employment. You respond with an appropriately gracious nod and continue your carefully measured progress toward the doors. The remaining distance passes in a blur of nodded acknowledgements to other courtiers, each interaction requiring you to pause, smile, exchange pleasantries, and pretend that you're not engaged in the most delicate diplomatic negotiation of your entire life, the one between your social obligations and your biological imperatives. Finally, mercifully, you reach the great doors. The guards nod respectfully as you pass through, and suddenly you're in the stone-walled corridor beyond the presence chamber. The temperature drops several degrees, and the sound of court conversation fades to a distant murmur behind the heavy wooden doors. You've made it. You're free. The worst is over. Except, of course, it isn't. The corridor stretches ahead of you, lined with tapestries depicting various royal victories and religious scenes. Candlelight flickers from iron sconces, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. Your footsteps echo softly as you hurry toward your destination, the small privy chamber that you've mentally mapped out during previous, less urgent visits to this part of the palace. But as you approach the narrow door tucked discreetly behind a tapestry depicting St. Christopher carrying travelers to safety, you hear something that makes your heart sink, like a stone dropped into deep water. Someone is singing, quietly, tunelessly, but unmistakably singing from behind that door. The privy is occupied. You stand in the corridor, staring at the closed door with the sort of concentrated attention usually reserved for deciphering ancient texts or watching diplomatic negotiations unfold. Your internal situation has progressed from urgent to critical, and your carefully maintained composure is beginning to develop hairline cracks. There's another privy chamber, you remind yourself, further down the corridor, past the turn where the tapestries give way to painted religious murals. It's a longer walk, but it's your best, possibly your only remaining option. Behind the door, the singing continues. It's a ballad about spring flowers and faithful love, rendered in a voice that suggests its owner has no intention of concluding their business quickly. You close your eyes for a moment, gathering your resources for what promises to be the longest walk of your life. When you open them again, your jaw is set with the sort of determination that has carried English nobles through far worse catastrophes than this one. After all, you've survived Lady Margaret Pole and Master Geoffrey Whitmore in a single afternoon. Surely you can manage one more corridor. At least you tell yourself as you begin walking toward the distant turn in the passage. The singing grows fainter with each step. That has to count for something. The corridor air hits your senses like a medieval manuscript written entirely in scent. You realize, with the sudden clarity that comes only in moments of personal crisis, that you've been so focused on your own internal diplomatic emergency that you've completely failed to notice the olfactory symphony playing around you. Tudor courts, you see, operate on an entirely different relationship with fragrance than modern sensibilities might expect. It's not so much that people smell bad, though they certainly do, but rather that they exist in a complex ecosystem of competing aromas, each carefully calibrated to communicate social status, personal hygiene philosophy, and occasionally, outright warfare. The nobleman who passed you moments ago trails a cloud of rosewater and what might charitably be called authentic human musk. His velvet doublet, which probably hasn't seen the inside of a washing tub since the reign of Henry VII, carries within its fibres the accumulated essence of every feast, hunt, and diplomatic encounter of the past several months. The effect is rather like walking behind a mobile perfume counter that's been abandoned in a stable. You pause to let another courtier pass, Lady Pemberton, if your nose serves correctly, identifiable by her signature blend of lavender water and what appears to be mild decomposition. She glides by with the sort of regal bearing that suggests she's entirely unaware that her left shoe is producing a sound remarkably similar to a small animal in distress, and an accompanying aroma that could fell an ox at 20 paces. The gentle flickering of candlelight creates dancing shadows on the stone walls, and you find yourself oddly comforted by the way these ancient corridors have witnessed countless similar olfactory adventures. Generations of nobles have walked these same stones, trailing their own unique fragrances, managing their own digestive diplomacy. There's something rather soothing about being part of such a long tradition of aromatic chaos. Tudor hygiene, you understand, operates on principles that would seem entirely foreign to modern sensibilities. Bathing, when it occurs at all, is viewed with the sort of suspicion usually reserved for French cuisine or Protestant theology. The prevailing medical wisdom suggests that water opens the pores to disease, making a thorough wash roughly equivalent to sending formal invitations to various plagues. Instead, nobles rely on what might generously be called strategic fragrance deployment. Pomanders, those intricate metal spheres filled with dried herbs and spices, dangle from belts like aromatic ammunition. Scented gloves protect delicate hands from both dirt and the unfortunate necessity of touching other people. Perfumed handkerchiefs flutter like tiny flags of surrender in the face of overwhelming natural processes. Lord Bancroft approaches from the opposite direction, and you're able to identify him a full corridor's length away by his distinctive bouquet, cloves, old wine, and what can only be described as wet dog with aspirations. He's taken the innovative approach of masking his natural aroma with something that smells like it might have been strained through a monastery floor. The result is less pleasant disguise and more olfactory archaeology project. As he draws nearer, you notice the subtle art of Tudor scent management in action. His face maintains perfect courtly composure, while his breathing has shifted to the shallow, careful rhythm of someone navigating a particularly challenging aromatic landscape. You recognize the technique. You've been unconsciously employing it yourself for the past several minutes. The gentle warmth of the stone corridor wraps around you like a familiar blanket, and there's something almost meditative about the way smells layer and mingle in these ancient spaces. Centuries of human habitation have created their own sort of olfactory patina, where individual fragrances blend into something larger, a scented tapestry of life lived fully, if not always fragrantly. Your own situation has become complicated. The internal pressure that began this entire adventure has been joined by a new concern, the growing awareness that your body's diplomatic crisis may be producing its own advanced scouts. There's a subtle but unmistakable shift in the air around you. Nothing dramatic, mind you, just the sort of gentle atmospheric change that suggests your digestive negotiations may be leaking classified information. Master Cromwell materializes from behind a tapestry depicting the Annunciation, moving with the sort of purposeful stride that suggests important business. His approach creates its own weather system of competing fragrances, expensive Italian leather, ink, parchment, and something that might be either exotic spices or mild putrefaction. It's impossible to tell which. and perhaps that's intentional. "My lady," he nods as he passes, his expression maintaining perfect diplomatic neutrality despite the fact that his nostrils flare slightly. Whether in response to his own aromatic presence or yours is deliciously unclear. The art of the Tudor nose you're learning is not about smelling nothing. It's about smelling everything while pretending to smell nothing, or at least nothing that requires social acknowledgement. It's olfactory poker, played with the highest possible stakes. Public embarrassment in front of people who control your family's political future. A young page rounds the corner ahead, moving with the quick, efficient pace of someone carrying important messages. As he approaches, you watch his face perform the delicate choreography of courtly scent management. Eyes fixed straight ahead, breathing carefully controlled, expression maintaining perfect servant's neutrality. Then he passes through what can only be described as your personal atmospheric disturbance. The effect is immediate and unfortunate. His step falters, his eyes water, his carefully maintained expression crumbles into something that suggests he's just encountered a particularly aggressive theological argument presented in aromatic form. He recovers admirably, continuing his journey with the sort of determined professionalism that suggests a promising career in diplomatic service, but not before shooting you a look that somehow manages to combine sympathy, horror, and what might be professional respect for the sheer impressiveness of your digestive achievement. The soft echo of his retreating footsteps mingles with the distant murmur of court conversation, creating a peaceful soundscape that seems to absorb and neutralize even the most challenging olfactory moments. These ancient walls have seen everything, smelled everything, survived everything. There's something profoundly calming about being held within such experienced stone. You continue your careful progress toward the second privy chamber, now hyper-aware of your own aromatic wake. Each step requires careful calculation, not just of distance and dignity, but of wind direction and atmospheric dispersal patterns. You've become a one-person weather system, complete with your own localized climate considerations. The corridor curves ahead, and you can see the blessed relief of your destination. A small wooden door tucked discreetly behind a painted mural of St. Augustine, contemplating the mysteries of divine love. The irony of seeking relief behind an image of contemplative spirituality is not lost on you. But as you approach, something stops you dead in your tracks. Not a sound this time, but a smell so distinctive, so unmistakably specific, that it can only mean one thing. Someone else has been here recently, engaged in exactly the same sort of biological diplomacy that has brought you to this moment. And judging by the lingering evidence, their negotiations were comprehensive. You stand motionless in the corridor, weighing your options with the sort of strategic thinking usually reserved for military campaigns or marriage negotiations. The gentle candlelight flickers peacefully around you, and somewhere in the distance, a lute player practices scales with the patient repetition of someone who has all the time in the world. Your own internal timeline, unfortunately, operates on considerably more urgent principles. That's when you hear it. A soft sneeze from somewhere behind you, followed by what sounds suspiciously like a small cat clearing its throat in dignified protest. You turn slowly, dreading what you might discover. Your Persian cat, Whiskers, who has apparently followed you from the presence chamber with the dedicated stealth of a furry intelligence operative, sits in the middle of the corridor. His normally composed feline expression has been replaced by something that can only be described as profound olfactory offense. He sneezes again, delicately, then fixes you with the sort of look that suggests he's reconsidering his entire relationship with human companionship. Whiskers maintains his position of feline moral authority in the corridor behind you, his tail twitching with the sort of rhythmic disapproval usually reserved for mice who've had the audacity to exist in his presence. His whiskers, the facial ones, not his rather literal name, quiver with what can only be described as aristocratic disdain. You've managed to offend a creature whose own bathroom habits involve burying evidence in sand, which suggests a level of olfactory achievement that would be impressive if it weren't so personally catastrophic. You turn back toward your destination with renewed determination, each step a careful negotiation between urgency and dignity. The painted mural of St. Augustine grows larger as you approach, his contemplative expression now seeming less like spiritual meditation and more like sympathetic understanding of earthly biological necessities. Augustine, after all, was quite fond of discussing the fallen nature of human flesh, though you suspect his theological treatises never quite anticipated this particular manifestation of corporeal limitation. The small wooden door tucked behind the saint's robes represents nothing less than salvation itself, and you approach it with the sort of reverent anticipation usually reserved for holy relics or unexpected inheritances. Your hand reaches for the iron latch, your heart soaring with relief, your internal diplomatic crisis finally approaching resolution. The latch doesn't budge, not locked, you realize with growing horror, but occupied. From within the small chamber comes the unmistakable sound of someone settling in for what appears to be an extended residence. Papers rustle. Someone clears their throat with the sort of leisurely authority that suggests they're planning to conduct important business from their current position. You stand frozen before the door, your hand still poised on the unmoving latch, experiencing what can only be described as the collapse of hope itself. It's rather like reaching for what you believe to be the last piece of marchpane at a feast, only to discover it's actually a decorative soap sculpture. The disappointment transcends mere inconvenience and enters the realm of existential crisis. A gentle cough from within confirms your worst fears. Not only is the privy occupied, but it's occupied by someone who sounds disturbingly comfortable with their current arrangement. Another rustle of papers suggests that whoever has claimed this sanctuary has brought reading material, a level of preparation that indicates no immediate plans for evacuation. Tudor privies, you recall from half-remembered conversations with learned gentlemen, represent one of the great status symbols of court life. The ability to conduct one's personal business in private, seated comfort, rather than squatting over a shared garderobe shaft with a dozen other courtiers, marks the difference between gentle breeding and common necessity. The finest privy chambers boast not only wooden seats, but tapestried walls, scented herbs, and even small windows for contemplative gazing. The chamber you're attempting to access belongs to the second tier of such facilities, respectably appointed, reasonably private, but not quite grand enough to warrant its own attendant. It's the sort of privy that suggests middle-ranking nobility, comfortable enough to maintain dignity, modest enough to avoid accusations of prideful excess, which makes the current situation all the more maddening. Whoever has claimed sanctuary within your desperately needed refuge clearly understands the social mathematics of Tudor toilet hierarchy. They've secured premium facilities and appear to be making the most of their architectural good fortune. You lean closer to the door, attempting to identify the occupant through audio analysis. The quality of the throat clearing suggests education and breeding. The rustle of papers indicates literacy, expensive literacy, judging by the crisp sound of high-quality parchment. A soft humming suggests someone entirely at ease with their current circumstances. Then, horror of horrors, you hear what can only be described as the sound of someone making themselves more comfortable. Not the urgent sounds of biological necessity, but the leisurely settling in of someone preparing for an extended scholarly session. Books thump onto what must be a small reading table. A wine goblet clinks against stone. Wine, in the privy. This person has brought refreshments. The implications settle over you like a heavy tapestry soaked in despair. You're not dealing with a fellow victim of digestive emergency, someone who might be reasoned with through shared desperation. You're facing a privy philosopher, someone who has transformed necessity into luxury, solitude into scholarly retreat. Desperate times, you reason, call for diplomatic intervention. You clear your throat delicately, employing the sort of polite cough that suggests presence without demanding attention. It's the vocal equivalent of a gentle curtsy, acknowledgement without presumption. The sounds within pause momentarily, then resume with what might be deliberate nonchalance. Your presence has been noted and diplomatically ignored. The message is clear. Occupancy will continue according to the resident's own timeline, regardless of external circumstances. You try again, this time with a slightly more pointed clearing of the throat, not demanding, certainly not common, but suggesting perhaps a gentle awareness that others might have need of the facilities. It's the sort of sound that, in normal circumstances, might inspire charitable consideration of shared resources. "I say," comes a voice from within, rich with the sort of plummy authority that suggests expensive education and inherited land. "Terribly sorry, but I'm rather in the middle of something important here." The voice belongs, unmistakably, to Sir Everard of Hardwicke, a gentleman whose reputation for thorough deliberation extends to every aspect of his existence. Sir Everard is the sort of person who considers the selection of morning gloves a matter requiring careful philosophical consideration. His approach to privy utilization, you realize with mounting horror, likely involves similar methodical attention to detail. "The thing is," Sir Everard continues conversationally, apparently addressing his remarks to the door, "I've brought along Ficino's commentary on Platonic love, and I'm finding the parallels between spiritual transcendence and digestive contemplation absolutely fascinating. Did you know that the ancient philosophers considered the body's natural functions a form of earthly meditation? Your internal crisis has now reached what military strategists might call a critical inflection point. Sir Everard has not only settled in for an extended philosophical session, but he's apparently discovered a scholarly justification for indefinite occupancy. This is no mere biological necessity, it's become an intellectual pursuit. I do hope you don't mind waiting," he adds with cheerful obliviousness. "Only I've brought along a rather nice claret, and the candlelight in here creates just the right atmosphere for serious contemplation. Have you ever considered how the garderobe represents a perfect metaphor for the cave in Plato's allegory? Fascinating stuff, really. You close your eyes and count to 10, employing breathing techniques that would make a monastery meditation master proud. Behind you, Whiskers has apparently decided that human society has finally revealed its true nature and begun an elaborate grooming routine that suggests he's washing his paws of the entire species. The corridor around you maintains its peaceful medieval atmosphere, all gentle candlelight and ancient stone, blissfully unaware of the domestic tragedy unfolding in its midst. Somewhere in the distance, a lute continues its patient scales, and the soft murmur of court conversation drifts through the air like a soothing lullaby. The world continues its calm rotation while you face personal catastrophe with all the dignity you can muster. Perhaps, you venture delicately, addressing the door with the sort of careful diplomacy usually reserved for foreign ambassadors, when your scholarly contemplation reaches a natural pause. "Oh, I shouldn't think so," Sir Everard replies cheerfully. "I've barely gotten through the introduction, and Ficino does go on rather. Marvellous stuff, though, all about the purification of earthly desires through spiritual discipline. Rather appropriate to the setting, don't you think?" Your hands clench into small, dignified fists. The irony of being trapped outside a privy while someone inside discusses the purification of earthly desires is not lost on you. If anything, it suggests that the universe has developed a rather sophisticated sense of theatrical timing. A new sound joins the corridor's acoustic landscape, footsteps approaching with the sort of measured pace that suggests someone important enough to take their time. You turn to see Master Fitzwilliam approaching, his own expression suggesting a man with business similar to your own. He takes in the scene with the quick assessment of someone experienced in court dynamics. You standing before the obviously occupied privy, the sounds of scholarly discourse emerging from within, your own increasingly desperate posture. His face assumes the sort of carefully neutral expression that suggests both sympathy and relief that your crisis is not his own. "Sir Everard?" he inquires politely, addressing the door. "Master Fitzwilliam," comes the cheerful reply. "Splendid timing. I don't suppose you're familiar with Neoplatonic philosophy. I'm having the most enlightening experience connecting ancient wisdom with, shall we say, contemporary biological realities." Master Fitzwilliam's eyebrows perform a small, eloquent dance that manages to convey both courtly politeness and private horror. He glances at you with the sort of look that acknowledges shared suffering, while maintaining plausible deniability of any unseemly knowledge. Perhaps, he suggests delicately, the garden offers suitable, contemplative opportunities. The garden. You hadn't considered the garden. The castle's herb garden lies just beyond the next corridor, a peaceful maze of rosemary, thyme, and carefully tended hedgerows. Private enough for desperate measures, yet close enough to civilization to maintain some pretense of dignity. It's not ideal, certainly not what your upbringing would consider proper, but desperation has a way of redefining propriety. Your internal negotiations have reached the point where garden hedgerows are beginning to look like acceptable diplomatic solutions. The garden. The very word carries with it a weight of theological significance that your current predicament renders both ironic and oddly appropriate. Gardens, after all, represent humanity's first encounter with divine displeasure over bodily functions, though admittedly, the original transgression involved forbidden fruit rather than forbidden winds. Still, there's something poetically circular about seeking sanctuary among the herbs and hedgerows when civilized facilities have proven inadequate to your needs. You take a measured breath, the sort employed by condemned nobles mounting scaffold steps, and begin your dignified retreat from the occupied privy. Master Fitzwilliam offers you a small, understanding nod, the kind of courtly acknowledgement that manages to convey both sympathy and complete ignorance of your actual circumstances. It's a masterpiece of diplomatic ambiguity, suggesting he's simply observed two gentlemen having a pleasant corridor conversation about perhaps the weather or the quality of the morning's bread. The walk toward the garden assumes the character of a pilgrimage, albeit one undertaken for reasons that would make most saints blush. Each step carries you further from the warm, civilized comfort of indoor plumbing and closer to what can only be described as a return to nature's more primitive arrangements. Your internal commentary has adopted the tone of a funeral dirge, complete with mental bagpipes playing a lament for your departed dignity. The corridor stretches before you like a gauntlet of potential witnesses. Each shadowy alcove might conceal a curious courtier, each tapestry could hide a gossiping lady-in-waiting, and every carved saint in every niche seems to regard you with expressions of increasing moral concern. Saint Christopher appears particularly judgmental, which seems rather rich coming from someone whose primary claim to fame involves carrying people across rivers, hardly the sort of activity that maintains pristine personal hygiene. Whiskers has apparently decided that your change of direction merits feline supervision. He emerges from whatever shadowy corner had been hosting his post-indignation grooming session and falls into step beside you with the sort of casual precision that suggests he's appointed himself your personal moral guardian. His tail maintains its position of upright disapproval, though you detect a slight relaxation in his whiskers that might indicate grudging respect for your strategic retreat. The castle's architectural psychology reveals itself as you progress through increasingly domestic spaces. The grand corridors, with their soaring arches and magnificent tapestries, give way to more practical passages, their stone walls warmed by the sort of honey-coloured candlelight that suggests proximity to kitchens and gardens. The very air grows more fragrant, carrying hints of rosemary and thyme that promise salvation through horticultural intervention. Tudor gardens, you recall from conversations with learned botanists, represent far more than mere decorative arrangements. They're living pharmacies, spiritual sanctuaries, and symbols of humanity's ability to impose order upon nature's chaos. Every herb serves multiple purposes: culinary, medicinal, and spiritual. Rosemary for remembrance, thyme for courage, lavender for peace. A veritable armory of aromatic assistance for whatever earthly tribulations might arise. The irony that you're seeking relief among plants specifically cultivated for their digestive properties doesn't escape your notice. Fennel for wind, peppermint for stomach troubles, chamomile for general constitutional distress. The garden represents nothing less than a medieval apothecary shop laid out in neat, fragrant rows. If one must resort to primitive facilities, at least one is doing so among vegetation specifically designed to address such primitive needs. A small wooden door marked with the Fitzwilliam family arms appears at the corridor's end, its iron hinges gleaming with the sort of well-maintained prosperity that suggests regular use by people who appreciate fine gardens. You pause before it, experiencing what medieval poets might have described as a moment of transcendent anticipation, though their verses typically concern themselves with spiritual rather than scatological liberation. The door opens with a whisper of well-oiled hinges, revealing Tudor England's answer to paradise. A walled herb garden basking in the sort of gentle afternoon sunlight that seems to exist specifically for the comfort of desperate courtiers. The space unfolds before you like an illuminated manuscript brought to life, each plant bed arranged with geometric precision, each pathway designed for contemplative strolling, each corner offering its own small sanctuary of aromatic privacy. Whiskers immediately abandons his supervisory duties in favor of what can only be described as sensory bliss. He approaches a patch of catmint with the sort of reverent anticipation usually reserved for religious relics, then proceeds to roll in it with an enthusiasm that would be unseemly in any creature less inherently dignified. His purring creates a gentle, rumbling soundtrack that mingles with the soft buzz of bees working their way through lavender blossoms. The garden's layout reveals the sort of careful planning that would make military strategists weep with envy. Raised beds create natural screens between different sections, while carefully trimmed hedges provide discreet alcoves perfect for private contemplation or other activities requiring discretion. A small fountain bubbles cheerfully in the center, its water music adding to the atmosphere of serene civilization. You move deeper into the garden with growing appreciation for whoever designed this particular corner of earthly paradise. The paths curve and wind with architectural psychology, creating an impression of vast space within modest boundaries. Each turn reveals new vistas, a sundial catching afternoon light, a small wooden bench positioned for optimal rose viewing, a statue of some classical goddess whose marble drapery suggests she'd be entirely understanding of human frailty. The sounds of the castle fade to a gentle murmur, replaced by the sort of pastoral symphony that poets spend their careers trying to capture. Bees humming counterpoint to the fountain's melody, leaves rustling gentle percussion, and somewhere in the distance, a thrush offering vocal embellishments that would make cathedral choirs jealous. It's the sort of acoustic environment that makes one understand why hermits choose caves and monasteries pride themselves on garden walls. Behind a particularly robust hedge of rosemary, chosen, no doubt, for both its aromatic properties and its impressive height, you discover what can only be described as providence made manifest. A small, private alcove contains a stone bench positioned beside a statue of Flora, the Roman goddess of flowers and spring. Her marble expression suggests the sort of benevolent understanding that comes from presiding over all manner of natural processes, both beautiful and necessary. The alcove offers everything your current crisis requires: complete privacy from prying eyes, soft earth receptive to urgent needs, and aromatic herbs that promise to maintain dignity even in desperate circumstances. The afternoon sun filters through the rosemary branches, creating a cathedral of green light that transforms necessity into something approaching sacred ritual. Flora regards you with marble serenity, her eternally flowering garlands suggesting a deity well versed in the cycles of growth, decay, and renewal that govern all earthly existence. If one must conduct primitive business, her expression seems to suggest at least one is doing so under the patronage of a goddess who understands that even the most refined processes ultimately serve nature's greater purposes. Whiskers emerges from his catmint communion with pupils dilated to perfect circles and whiskers twitching with herbal satisfaction. He surveys your chosen sanctuary with the sort of professional assessment that suggests even feline sensibilities approve of your horticultural solution. His purring intensifies, creating a gentle, rhythmic blessing that mingles with the garden's natural symphony. The moment has arrived when necessity must triumph over convention, when nature's call must finally receive its long-overdue answer. You position yourself with as much dignity as the circumstances allow, Flora's benevolent gaze offering silent absolution for the compromise between courtly behavior and biological imperative. The garden holds its breath, as if all of creation understands that you're about to cross a threshold from which there can be no dignified return. And so, among the rosemary and beneath Flora's marble gaze, you discover what medieval philosophers might have called the ultimate democracy of human experience. Here, in this fragrant sanctuary where herbs grow specifically to remedy the very predicament that brought you to their embrace, the elaborate hierarchies of Tudor court life reveal themselves to be little more than elaborate theatre performed over the most basic of biological truths. The relief, when it finally comes, carries with it a profound sense of cosmic justice. Not the dramatic, earth-shaking satisfaction that poets attribute to great victories, but something far more fundamental, the quiet triumph of nature over artifice, of human need over social convention. Flora's expression seems to shift in the dappled light, her marble features suggesting the sort of ancient wisdom that comes from presiding over countless generations of mortals who discovered that even queens, in their private moments, must bow to the same earthly requirements as scullery maids. Whiskers, having concluded his own communion with the catmint, positions himself as a discreet sentinel near the alcove's entrance. His tail has finally descended from its position of moral outrage, settling into what can only be described as philosophical acceptance. Perhaps even cats, in their infinite wisdom, understand that dignity is not about the absence of embarrassing moments, but rather about how one conducts oneself in their inevitable aftermath. The garden's afternoon light grows softer, creating that particular quality of illumination that transforms even mundane activities into something approaching sacred ritual. The fountain's gentle music continues its liquid poetry while bees work their way through the lavender with the sort of methodical contentment that suggests they, at least, have never concerned themselves with the arbitrary rules of human propriety. From this aromatic sanctuary, the sounds of court life drift over the garden walls like distant music from another world. You can hear the faint murmur of conversations, the rustle of silk gowns on stone floors, the occasional burst of laughter that suggests the great machinery of courtly entertainment continues its elaborate dance, blissfully unaware that one of its participants has just achieved a victory that would never be recorded in any official chronicle but feels, nonetheless, monumentally significant. Tudor record keepers, you reflect, maintained meticulous accounts of everything: grain shipments, fabric purchases, the precise number of candles consumed during royal dinners. Yet nowhere in their careful ledgers would they note that Lady Margaret's digestive distress was resolved through strategic horticultural intervention, or that Master Fitzwilliam's kindly ignorance preserved everyone's sense of propriety, or that a certain tortoise-shell cat served as unwitting catalyst for what amounted to a small but meaningful rebellion against the tyranny of perfect behavior. The afternoon sun continues its gentle descent, casting longer shadows between the herb beds and creating the sort of golden hour that medieval illuminators spent lifetimes trying to capture in their manuscripts. Here, surrounded by plants that exist specifically to address human frailty, you experience what can only be described as a moment of profound philosophical clarity. The elaborate codes of conduct that govern court life, the precise angles of curtsies, the careful gradations of social precedence, the unspoken rules about which bodily functions may be acknowledged and which must be steadfastly ignored, all of these suddenly seem less like immutable laws of nature and more like collective agreements to maintain a pleasant fiction. Everyone at court, from the Queen herself down to the newest page, carries within them the same basic biological reality, the same needs, the same occasional rebellions of digestive tract against social expectation, the same quiet moments of relief when nature's demands are finally satisfied. The difference lies not in the absence of such moments, but in the elaborate choreography developed to pretend they don't exist, or, when they do occur, to gracefully navigate around them without ever acknowledging their reality. Flora's marble gaze seems to encompass this entire philosophical revelation, with the sort of serene approval that comes from a goddess who has witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, all of which developed elaborate rules for pretending that their citizens were somehow exempt from the basic requirements of embodied existence. Her expression suggests that she finds the whole enterprise rather charming, in the way that adults find children's games endearing, even when they're based on obviously impossible premises. The garden's carefully tended beds represent their own form of wisdom, recognition that humans require both the wild abundance of nature and the careful cultivation of civilization. These herbs grow in neat geometric patterns, but they serve the same purposes they would in any untended meadow. They're just doing so with better organizational principles and more attractive borders. Perhaps, you think, this represents the ideal compromise, acknowledging natural needs while surrounding them with as much beauty and dignity as possible. Whiskers approaches your alcove with the sort of casual grace that suggests the crisis has passed and normal feline routines may now resume. He pauses to investigate a particular patch of earth with professional interest, then settles into a sphinx-like pose that manages to convey both alertness and profound relaxation. His purring creates a gentle, rhythmic backdrop that mingles with the garden's other sounds to create what medieval monks might have recognized as a form of contemplative music. The late afternoon air carries new scents: bread baking in distant kitchens, the green smell of watered gardens, and beneath it all the faint incense drift from the castle's chapel, where evening prayers are beginning. It's a reminder that even in this moment of private rebellion against propriety, you remain part of a larger community bound together by rhythms both sacred and secular, both elevated and earthily practical. From your position among the rosemary, the castle's walls no longer seem like barriers designed to contain and control, but rather like gentle boundaries that create a space where different forms of human need, for beauty, for privacy, for dignity, for relief, can coexist without necessarily acknowledging each other directly. It's an architecture of graceful mutual ignorance, designed to preserve everyone's ability to maintain pleasant fictions about the essential elegance of civilized life. The approaching evening brings its own subtle changes to the garden's atmosphere. The light grows more golden, the shadows more pronounced, and somewhere in the distance, you can hear the first tentative notes of what might be a lute, tuning itself for the evening's entertainment. It's a reminder that soon you'll need to rejoin the elaborate dance of court life, but for now, in this moment of fragrant solitude, you're free to simply exist as a human being who has successfully navigated a minor but significant crisis. Flora's marble drapery seems to flutter in the gentle breeze, and for just a moment, you could almost believe that even ancient goddesses understand the profound satisfaction that comes from solving life's most basic problems with grace, ingenuity, and just a touch of rebellious humor. And so, as the first evening stars begin their gentle vigil above the Tudor walls, you find yourself reluctant to leave this sanctuary of rosemary and quiet revelation. The day's crisis has passed into that warm category of experiences that feel both mortifying and oddly triumphant, like having successfully navigated a particularly delicate dance step that nobody else even noticed you were performing. From somewhere in the castle's depths comes the gentle percussion of servants lighting the evening torches, each flame a small victory against the gathering dusk. These are the same servants who, you realize with growing appreciation, possess the supernatural ability to witness everything while appearing to see nothing at all. Master Fitzwilliam, bless his diplomatically selective vision, has undoubtedly spent the afternoon tending to other garden emergencies with the same careful blindness he applied to yours. It's a skill that keeps courts functioning and courtiers sane, this elaborate dance of mutual unseeing that allows everyone to maintain their dignity while quietly acknowledging that dignity itself is largely a matter of collective imagination. The garden's evening transformation continues around you with the sort of unhurried grace that makes human anxieties seem charmingly temporary. Shadows deepen between the herb beds, creating pools of violet darkness that smell of time and approaching night. The fountain's voice has grown softer, more intimate, as if sharing secrets with the darkening sky. Even the bees have concluded their methodical work and departed for whatever mysterious chambers they call home, leaving behind only the lingering sweetness of their industry. Whiskers emerges from his contemplation of a particularly fascinating beetle to offer you a look of such profound feline wisdom that you half expect him to begin dispensing advice about the nature of existence. Instead, he simply yawns, a gesture so perfectly timed and thoroughly dismissive of the day's earlier drama that it serves as the most elegant possible commentary on the relative importance of human embarrassment in the grand scheme of things. His stretch afterwards suggests that he has successfully filed today's events under amusing but ultimately irrelevant human nonsense, and is ready to move on to more pressing concerns, such as the evening's potential for salmon scraps. The lute music from the castle grows more confident now, weaving melodies that drift through the garden like audible moonbeams. Someone is practicing what sounds like a pavane, the notes occasionally stumbling over themselves in that endearing way that suggests genuine learning rather than perfect performance. It's a reminder that everyone, from courtiers to musicians to wandering philosophers hiding among the herbs, is essentially improvising their way through existence, hoping that their mistakes will be forgotten and their small triumphs remembered. Flora's marble expression has settled into what can only be described as maternal amusement. She's seen it all, this ancient goddess, empires that thought themselves eternal, pharaohs who believed in their own divine infallibility, medieval scholars who were absolutely certain they had figured out the precise number of angels who could dance on the head of a pin. And through it all, humans have continued to face the same delightfully mundane challenges: where to find privacy, how to maintain dignity while addressing bodily needs, and whether that rustling in the bushes indicates approaching judgment or just a curious cat. The first torches begin to flicker to life in the castle windows, creating warm rectangles of golden light that speak of hearth fires, evening meals, and the comfortable rituals that mark day's end. Somewhere, kitchen servants are laying out tomorrow's herbs, perhaps including a few sprigs from this very garden. The thought creates a pleasing sense of continuity, that these same plants will continue their quiet work of healing and helping, generation after generation, long after today's little crisis has already faded into that catch-all category, one of those mildly embarrassing garden moments. The air grows cooler, carrying new scents: wood smoke from the kitchens, the green exhalation of plants settling into evening, and beneath it all, that indefinable smell of approaching night that seems to whisper promises of rest, dreams, and the sort of deep sleep that makes yesterday's worries seem like characters from someone else's story. Your alcove among the rosemary has become a pocket of perfect privacy, a space where you can simply be, no roles, no rush, no need to impress, surrounded by plants that understand, in their quiet vegetable way, that being human is a complicated business, requiring occasional retreats and frequent forgiveness. As the moon rises, a pale disk that has witnessed countless centuries of human folly and continues to regard it all with silvery equanimity, you realize that today's adventure has been, in its own small way, a masterclass in what medieval philosophers might have called the art of graceful imperfection. Not the dramatic sort of grace that involves grand gestures and public recognition, but the quieter kind that allows people to navigate life's more awkward moments without losing their essential sense of humor about the whole enterprise. The garden's nighttime orchestra begins to tune up, the rustle of leaves settling into their evening positions, the distant hoot of an owl who has apparently taken up residence in the castle's towers, and somewhere, the soft padding of what might be other cats beginning their nocturnal investigations. It's a gentle symphony that speaks of cycles within cycles, of rest and renewal, of the way each day's small dramas eventually dissolve into the larger rhythm of seasons and years and centuries. Whiskers stretches once more, fixes you with a look that manages to convey both approval and mild amusement, then begins his own journey back toward the castle, his tail held high in what can only be interpreted as a gesture of feline benediction. His departure feels like permission to do the same, to rejoin the human world with the sort of quiet confidence that comes from having successfully weathered a minor storm and discovered that the sky, amazingly enough, has not fallen. The torchlight from the castle windows grows warmer as true darkness settles over the garden, transforming it into a space suspended between waking and dreaming, between history and story, between the weight of social expectation and the blessed lightness of simply being human in a world that somehow, despite all evidence to the contrary, continues to be fundamentally kind to those who approach it with sufficient humor and humility. And so, dear fellow traveller through time's more amusing corridors, as you prepare to leave this fragrant sanctuary and return to whatever century you call home, perhaps you'll carry with you the knowledge that dignity was never about perfection. Grace was never about avoiding mistakes, and the most profound rebellions are often the quietest ones, like finding peace among the rosemary while the world continues its elaborate dance just beyond the garden walls. Sleep well, knowing that humans have been figuring it out as they go along for a very long time now, and somehow, wonderfully, we're all still here.